Terra, also dubbed Holy Terra and known in antiquity as Earth, is the homeworld of mankind, the resting place of the Emperor, and the most holy and revered place in the Imperium. Pilgrims throughout the Imperium flock to Terra. Even the barren soil that pilgrims tread upon is considered holy. It is effectively a temple the size of a planet. As the capital world of the Imperium, Terra is also home to the main headquarters of many important Imperial organizations, including the Adeptus Terra, the Administratum, and the Departmento Munitorum. History. The Age of Terra is the name given to the period of human history dating from the dawn of mankind to the Dark Age of technology. Early in mankind's history, the mysterious perpetual known only as the Emperor is said to have ruled as a king with Old Person as his war master. The two engaged in a war with a cult which in time would become known as the Cognitae. During their war, Person defies the Emperor's orders by destroying a warp-generating tower constructed by the Cognitae. Later, cities such as Atlantis and Nova Uruk are cited as being the most legendary and ancient cities of Terra. Nations known as Germani, Marica, Britannia are said to have prospered and wilted during this time. Eventually humanity was able to invent space travel, allowing for the colonization of the solar system. During the Dark Age of technology, Terra was finally able to leave the Sol system thanks to the advent of warp drives. Mankind was able to colonize much of the galaxy as a result. Terra was the center of an empire that coexisted peacefully with its first colony, Mars. During the Age of Strife, Terra fell into chaos and mayhem as techno-barbarians, mutants, warlords, and psychers rampaged throughout the planet. Becoming a wasteland, it was not until the arrival of the Emperor and his Thunder Warriors that the birthplace of mankind was again unified into a single polity. Before the completion of the Unification Wars, Terra was divided into several competing nations. Heresy Era. Proclaimed the capital of the newly formed Imperium by the Emperor following the unification of the planet, Terra remained the center of humanity throughout the Great Crusade. Terra was the site of great change during this period, with the continent-spanning Imperial palace being constructed and the burgeoning Imperial bureaucracy settling on the new throne world, seeing a massive population and construction boom. The Emperor during this time attempted to restore the nature and wildlife to Terra, but ultimately the Horus Heresy would see these dreams crushed. During the Horus Heresy, Terra was the site of the dramatic final battle of the conflict that saw the Emperor crippled and the traitorous War Master Horus killed. Terra was devastated during the battle, and even 10,000 years later, the scars of the siege were still visible on its ancient infrastructure. During the battle, the Emperor's children were particularly vicious towards Terra's population, engaging in acts of cruelty and debauchery. The terror was so great that in the 10,000 years since the heresy, the populace of Terra has retained a terror of all space marines, loyalist and otherwise. For this reason, there are only a handful of marines on Terra at any given time, including the Wolfblade, a small unit of space wolves assigned as bodyguards to house Belisarius of the Navis Nobilite. Present post-heresy era. Since the heresy, Terra has largely stood as the untouched center of the Imperium, though it was the site of violence during the War of the Beast, the beheading, Siege of the Eternity Gate, Years of Madness, and the Age of Apostasy. Recently, there have been gene stealer cults spotted on Terra, beginning the unthinkable war. 10,000 years after the heresy, Terra faced its greatest challenge since Horus' betrayal. Due to the forming of the Great Rift, the Astronomicon went dark for a period known as the Noctis Aeterna, which on Terra lasted a little over a month. Most travel to Terra was paralyzed, and warp energies began to manifest on the planet, leading to widespread riots, starvation, and madness. Though formidably defended, Terra's defensive forces could not contain the massive social upheavals outside of key structures such as the palace, and many hives fell into full-scale anarchy. Chaos cults began to operate openly and recruit from the desperate masses as the mayhem spread. At the behest of inquisitorial representative Cleopatra, Arx, the High Lords of Terra issued the Arx Doctrine, which saw much of Terra ceded to mob rule, while remaining Imperial forces reinforced the palace, Forbidden Fortress, and other key structures. Ultimately, some 1/4 of Terra was temporarily lost to anarchy. While the Custodes and other forces ventured outside of the palace walls to contain the worst of the heretics, they were unable to prevent the summoning of a great Khaonate army onto Terra's soil. In the ensuing Battle of Lion's Gate, the Throne World faced its second major invasion. In the end, due to the intervention of the Custodes, Sisters of Silence, Grey Knights, and the reborn Rubik Guilhermin, the legions of chaos were turned back. Afterwards, Guilhermin took the mantle of Lord Commander of the Imperium on Terra, and oversaw a massive purge of Imperial bureaucracy that became known as the Primarch's Scourge. During this campaign, many xenophile and chaos cults were exposed and collateral damage spiraled across Terra. While Terra was secured from demonic invasion, it still took many months for Imperial forces to secure the planet outside of the Imperial Palace and other key zones. The chaos of the Noctis Aeterna and the demands of Guilhermin's Indomitus crusade prevented the Imperium from swiftly restoring order to the planet, leaving much of the fighting to the overextended Custodes and Arbiters. The issue proved very controversial to the High Lords of Terra. Geography. Terra is a hive world, stripped long ago of all forms of resources. Its soil is utterly barren, and its atmosphere is a fog of pollution. Massive, labyrinthine edifices of state sprawl across the vast majority of the surface. Its oceans have long ago boiled away, though newer artificial ones were created by the Emperor after the Unification Wars. Many mountain ranges have been leveled, perhaps all of them except the Himalayas, which seemingly remain all but untouched due to the laboratory said to be underneath, and the chambers of the Astronomicon that course throughout the whole mountain range. Despite being devastated during the Horus Heresy and earlier than that during the Long Age of Strife, Terra is probably the most vastly populated and built-up hive world in the Imperium. Beneath countless layers and millennia of urban accretion, catacombs hold older cultures completely different from the surface ones. Much of the population of Terra exists in the most terrible squalor, their greatest hope that one of their offspring might be accepted into the Adeptus Terra, the priesthood of Terra, as a menial, an adept of the lowliest sort. A square meter of land on Terra costs more than a palace on any hive world. Only the most wealthy can even afford to own a small section of land. Terra is also home to orbital plates. These orbiting cities were old even by the time of the Unification Wars, but during the Horus Heresy and the prelude to the Battle of Terra, Rogel Dorn had them all dismantled, moved, or abandoned over questions of their safety. Also in orbit are countless orbital defense platforms. Although Terra is nominally the homeworld of the Imperial Fists chapter, the chapter itself rarely visits Terra, if at all, and bases its operations from its gargantuan star fortress, the Phalanx. Teeming with untold billions, Terra has endless causeways which stretch across both above and below its surface. These include conventional highways and roads as well as sky lanes for aircraft. The transportation networks are divided into three groups. The first is the Via Ordinaria, which are chaotic and cramped passages used by the commoners of the planet. The second is the Via Exclusiva, which was actually the largest network and used by security personnel. The third is the Via Prohibita, which is kept clear at all times and used only by the highest echelons of Imperial society, such as high-level members of the Adeptus Terra, senior members of the Adeptus Arbitus, and the Inquisition. It is often said that Terra consumes everything and makes nothing, and while an exaggeration, the maxim holds a degree of truth, as the planet requires tremendous amounts of resources to be shipped in from off-world to sustain its gargantuan population, and is itself devoid of any self-sufficiency. Without daily shipments from thousands of vessels, Terra would quickly starve and plunge into anarchy. The Imperial tithe ultimately is for the benefit of Terra and makes it the site of both incredible wealth and extreme poverty. While Terra had a grand splendor and was heavily restored during the time of the Great Crusade, as of the 41st millennium most of its structures have decayed. As the throne world of the Emperor of Mankind, Terra is among the most heavily defended worlds within the Imperium. As Terra itself faced few assaults in the 10,000 years since the heresy, even the idea of attacking the planet was seen as ridiculous by many Imperial officials. Nonetheless, the planet has always sported significant defenses, including forces from both the Imperial Navy and Army. Thank you for listening to this entry from the Warhammer 40,000 Lexicanum.